All right, we're going to continue our series in Mark and who is the king. And we're going to pick up in the middle passage that we omitted last week. But you'll see we'll be connected. So we are in Mark chapter 11, and we're going to start in verse 15. And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And the chief priests and the scribes heard. And they heard it, and they were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. Two things that I think are a homeowner's worst fear: water damage that you don't know about, and mold. Especially something we got to pay attention to up here. Anybody had to deal with water damage or mold in a house that they've owned? It's a big deal, right? It's never just like, oh, cool, super simple, like we'll just dry it up and put a fan there and it's good. No, mold is pervasive, we know, and water damage too. So once you kind of have a little bit of water damage, typically you have a lot of water damage. And if you have mold, typically it's not just a little bit. And I think when you find that, you really need to find it all the way to the source. Like you need to not just treat what you can see, but treat more than what you can see and try to get all the mold and get all the water damage taken up. I think these are things that can take place without anyone seeing, but from outside everything looks fine. Like you won't typically walk into a house and know that there's maybe mold or maybe that there's some water damage that's happening there. And so I think that this is an apt parallel of what we're going to look at, what Jesus is going to do. These next three chapters really, chapter 11, 12, and 13 are really we're going to see Jesus really confront and engage with people who are putting themselves on the throne of their own hearts. He's going to challenge corruptness. He's going to go after things that are not as they're designed and things that are not intentional. And you're going to probably scratch your head a little bit because I think you're going to see a holy anger in some different ways that present in ways that we wouldn't expect from Jesus. And I think it's important that we focus on this, but there's a lot of mold or water damage that's happening in all of the religious people that are happening around Jesus. And typically we don't see these things until we smell it. And when you smell it, it's one you don't forget, or you get sick. And you're like, man, I keep getting sick. What's going on? I can't figure out what that is. And that's sometimes what gives it away. So when Jesus is going into the temple, he's not just tidying up a visible mess. He's not just seeing that, oh, wow, this is, offset. He's pulling out hidden sin. As we talked about last week, he's calling out hypocrisy. He's sharing the hardness of their hearts. See, cleansing the temple is not just about going deep. Or excuse me, I said that wrong. Cleansing the temple is about going deep, not just fixing appearances. It's not just looking on the outside. It's about what's happening in the heart. And a question that I'd have you consider as we walk through this passage is, what unseen rot is happening in your life? What areas of your heart are waterlogged and maybe just on the border of just getting water damaged? Is there a piece that's happening that you might have some, mold that's starting to grow, but you haven't paid attention to it because you've kind of ignored it? Now, I might meddle a little bit today, but I think the hope is that you would see the Spirit would lead you through some of that conviction. This moment I need to set some context for, so I brought some pictures and a few different things that are going to help us take a look at what's going on. So typically I think when we, Chris, I'm going to go out of order for a second here, but typically when we think of the clearing out the temples, we see this picture of Jesus cracking whips and flipping tables, right? And we know that sometimes our Christian brothers and sisters, can you put that one up when you get a chance? Perfect. Maybe it looks like this a little bit. Jesus is sending them out, he's getting them ready to go. Now, I always kind of thought about this man, that doesn't look like a really big space, right? In my mind, I'm thinking it's a certain size and it's a big commotion and it sets everything straight and then it's going to be like it's supposed to be. But that's not really the case of what's happening here. See, at this time that Jesus is coming into the temple's under construction. And this is the third iteration of the temple, and it's become quite a large thing. It's not just the center of their faith. It's become this corporation of big business that's happening through the temple and people preparing for their worship. And the focus is getting more on the selling of things than it's been on the worship. The design is broken. So, Herod's temple, it's the third temple of Israel. It's enormous. The outer court, they called the court of the Gentiles, was 35 acres. Huge. This place is really big. I got this first picture kind of shows you a little bit of what the temple's looking like for Herod's temple. They started working on it they finished working on it I think it was somewhere between 62 and 64 AD. And what's crazy to me is that once they finish the construction of this third iteration of the temple, they only have it for about 6 or 8 years before it's destroyed. But this place is massive. It's really, really large. Chris, go ahead and show us the next one with scale. This one is the Herod's temple, so you have an idea of what that image looked like with but this is how big it is. This is just the temple. It's about 3 football fields, maybe 3 or 4.5 football fields. It's a big space. The holy space itself. This is a really large thing. I think sometimes we just think the small picture of Jesus flipping tables like he just came in here and got mad at us for having dinner. This is a bigger deal that he's disrupting. This is not a small thing. Go ahead to the next one. So the temple court looked like this. When I say it covered 35 acres, this is just so you have an idea of how big the business of worship is here. Now, in a day like ours where we are seeing exposés of churches and these large things, and we know televangelists that are trying to get jets and all these other things like that, it's like this. It's not new. It's big, large-scale corruption that's been the case. Now, I'm not saying every single televangelist is corrupt, but what I am saying is that the focus is very, very easy to miss. The focus of this was to be great and grand and prepare people to come into the presence of God, and that there was going to be this beacon of hope for all the nations. But what it's come into is selling and taking advantage. And as we just sang in some songs, the poor and the powerless, they matter. But at the temple, they're getting taken advantage of. So when Jesus comes into this situation, it's not a small thing. He's like coming into a house full of rot. It needs to be addressed now. It can't be left to continue. This space is so vast it took 3 people holding hands just to get around one of those columns. That's how big. Like 3 people around. This is just a scale that's beyond. It was meant to be a place of worship for all nations, but it had become a marketplace. It became a shortcut. And probably what grieves my heart the most is it became a system of exclusion. A place that was really just about if you had the coin to show up. I really like how the Pillar commentary talked about it. It said, Herod's temple, Israel's third temple, following the temple of Solomon and Zerubbabel. So if you're remembering in the Old Testament, Solomon builds the temple that David couldn't. And then it gets sacked because they don't follow God, and they basically get kicked out and exiled. And then Zerubbabel and Ezra and that whole Nehemiah situation happens, and the temple gets rebuilt. But it's nothing like the former glory of what Solomon did. And then this is the third iteration of the temple. So when Jesus goes there, it's still under construction. And the construction had started about 20 BC, and the temple consisted of 4 divisions in immense and grandiose proportions. The first and the largest was the court of the Gentiles, an open-air quadrangle measuring some 500 yards long by 325 yards wide. Chris, put that picture up one more time for me. Thank you. And it was enclosed by a portico supported by rows of columns. According to Josephus, the columns were 30 feet high and so massive it took 3 people to wrap their hands around it, or wrap their arms around it to just get around how big those columns are. Jesus steps into this chaos, and he doesn't just quietly shake his head. He doesn't just come into the mess and this perversion of the design of what's supposed to be happening here and just be okay with it. He doesn't just sit back while this is messed up. He jumps in, he overturns tables, he drives people out. He shuts the whole operation down. or at least a section of it, because I mean, like, this thing is large. Why? Because I think the temple lost its purpose, or at least the people that were running the temple had lost the purpose. This brings us to our first point, is that Jesus is cleansing the table, cleansing the temple, so that he can show us the same thing for cleansing our heart. This is sometimes just the argument of degrees. Man, I'm doing the stuff. I'm entering in God's presence. My worship is live. I feel like God's leading me. I understand the scriptures. I'm serving people. I'm putting the pieces together. And then, man, somehow I just drifted away from that. I'm doing all the stuff, but my heart's not in it. Hey, I'm distracted by phones or, the things that distract us, TVs and, grading papers and, work stuff and the stress of our life and, the hopefully not the water damage that isn't happening. But those things can be distracting just the same. Even sports and competition can be things that are focused. And so I think Jesus is cleansing the temple, setting an example of what this is supposed to be back. Like not just setting an example, but kind of showing them that they're missing the point. And instead of like trying to restore it back to what it is, he's showing that this is going to be the disillusion, that the temple is not going to be the prominent center of faith that the temple had done. It already had lost it, at least kind of spiritually. And now he's going to show them that they need to have, that they need to cleanse, and it's going to be a different situation. In verse 15, he says, they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple, and he began to drive out those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. Does anybody know why Jesus would get mad about him, like people selling pigeons in the marketplace or in the court of the Gentiles? What do you think?
It's supposed to be doves.
Well, no, it's not. Doves and pigeons. Pigeons are fine too. So, but you're close, but it's not quite right. Anybody else? I know you know. So in the sacrificial system, there was different orders of animals based on carrying the sin, and there were different types of sacrifices that were made. What do you think the least valuable animal would be if you thought about all the Old Testament animals? What do you think they would be? The pigeons. So who would be the ones that would be making sacrifices with pigeons? The poor people. And this is something that would be really easy just to read past and be like, oh yeah, why did it say that? But it gives you an inclination and an understanding of what actually is happening here, is that they're taking advantage of the poor people. The God that was supposed to be to all nations, that's supposed to be Israel, that's supposed to be this example, this neighbor that is helping people see who God is missing it because they're taking advantage of those that don't even have much. And they're taking advantage of even what they have. And what's crazy is there's a whole group, and as I was reading the commentaries, it was fascinating to me. They kept talking about it like the temple cult. The temple cult of people that were kind of profiting, and these merchants and these, even the religious elite, the Sanhedrin and even the Sadducees that are benefiting from the corruption that's happening in the Gentile court. Now, of course, they wouldn't do that in the Holy of Holies, right? Of course, they wouldn't do that where only Jewish men could go. They weren't doing it in the women's court either, but it's okay if we do it in the Gentile court. It's not right. And this is the corruption it's focused in. So when we kind of think about Jesus flipping the table, sometimes I think we get a little uncomfortable that Jesus gets mad. But he should get mad. And we should get mad too when we see exclusivist stuff that happens like that. That we shouldn't just sit by idly while injustice is happening. That we need to focus that anger for a voice to be heard, for a truth to be heard. And it's so easy because I think these little degrees just miss a little piece. We focus so much on that. Hey, I want to make sure that we're creating environments where everybody's included, and that's the thing. But we're really are doing exclusivism in another way. We're excluding some different sets of people. We're excluding people with disabilities, or we're excluding people that can't communicate, or introverts, or whatever the type of people are. Could be racial, could be even just learning abilities. There's lots of different ways that it's hard to create inclusive environments. Would you agree? 100%. And you're never going to be able to catch everybody, even if you wanted to try to catch everybody. But the point of it is trying not to leave out those that are trying to access God. And Israel was always supposed to be setting this example for all the neighbors, but what did Israel always do? Oh, hey, what are you guys doing over there? Oh, you guys put poles up there? Cool. Hey, you burn incenses on it? Cool, let's do it. Oh, cool, you sacrifice your children? Well, it's working for them. It sounds silly, but it's exactly what they kept doing, continue to do. And so the thing that made them special, the thing that where God is engaged with his people, where they come and they're supposed to get right with God, is completely corrupt, just like their hearts. So when they're going to get reset and come back in to re-engage and have a, their sin be atoned for, they leave just as dirty, if not dirtier, than they came. The scene isn't just about economic injustice, it's about spiritual distortion. The people had turned worship into a transaction. They were exploiting the very people who were meant to encounter God's mercy. Does that make you think a little different about Jesus flipping tables? It's not just hey, he's acting out of character. I don't know what's going on. Maybe he knows the last few days are coming and he's just kind of losing it. I'm not saying that you guys think that, but sometimes that's a subtle piece of what we expect when Jesus doesn't act like we think he should. Jesus quotes Leviticus 5:7. He's a provision for the poor. Said but if he cannot afford a lamb, he brings to the Lord his compensation for the sin that he has committed: 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering. They're excluding people. They're taking advantage of the poor. Now, there were some practical reasons why this had developed. It didn't just happen because hey, we're going to just totally corrupt this, but that's not usually how corruption happens anyways. Corruption is usually just a little small decision that we make that kind of turns into a big deal. Wow, I look back and I'm I can't believe I'm that person, but I made all the choices to get there. Man, all of our dramas, our TV shows and sitcoms, all these things are ripe with these kind of things, hoping for a moral turnaround. Sometimes we see it and sometimes we don't. But it's usually one small decision justified to lots of decisions. People would travel in, especially during Passover. Jerusalem would swell to 10 times its size. It made me think about where the largest town in Nebraska is? The joke is it's wherever the football game is. Because all the people would come and that would be the largest population. I'm not sure if it's as true as it used to be, but it was very true for a season. And Jerusalem was like that. When the holy holidays would come through, everybody would come into town and they'd travel. And are you going to take your animals all the way from where you're going far to go to Jerusalem? The further you go, the less likely I think you're likely to do that. So some entrepreneurs thinking, hey, I can help that traveler by selling some lambs. Hey, I can help that traveler by, I'm going to sell goats, or I'm going to sell pigeons, or I'm going to sell, these things that they need for the sacrifice. It's going to be convenient. It's almost like if we had an ATM in the foyer right there. Don't worry, the fees just go to the church. It's okay. Bad taste, right? This picture of Jesus with the whips and cleansing shows us a holy anger. And I said, I think this shows us too small a picture of what it would have actually looked like, because we know it would have been open air, and that kind of looks like it's inside more than it's not. And we know it's tremendously large. So it's likely that Jesus is holding down a section of this big, 35 acres, but he's probably not in control of all the 35 acres, and trying to show them, hey, this is what's going on here. 11:16 was interesting to me. When I first was reading it, preparing for this week, I'm like, why does he care if someone's carrying something into the temple? Anybody have an idea why Jesus cares if they carry something into the temple? I think it's a good idea. I think that's kind of some of the idea. People had made getting through this tremendous part of the city a shortcut. I got to get these wares over to this guy. I got to make this delivery. I got to do this thing, and they weren't staying. They were just passing. But they were bringing their activity through the church. It'd almost be like if merchants were taking their caravan right through the sanctuary. Sanctuary is probably not a best term. It'd probably be better to say if it was the foyer, or even the parking lot, just for context. But here's a parade. If the ice cream truck showed up and started selling ice cream at every one of our services. Kind of in that vein, it's a little bit more they are profaning what's supposed to be holy. They are perverting what's supposed to be set aside and made for God. They are making it gross. Just because they're not even thinking about it. And they're just like, hey, I'm going to get this delivery where it needs to go. I got to get this basket where it needs to go. So Jesus was like, no, we're not. We are setting space. We are making this like it's supposed to be. This is designed for us to be able to come into the presence of God and not just be another thing that we're doing and a shortcut for us. That's our second point, is there's no shortcuts. I really like this picture. I worked with ChatGPT to make it because I think this is sometimes how our hearts actually look. Now, it's fresh water that's being poured in that's bringing this heart to bring more health to it. Now, Scripture says that we're created new, so we have a new heart that's put into us, but we still have to wrestle with this flesh nature, and I think it sometimes looks like this, where we have to wash out the bad stuff that's in our heart, and we have to continue to pursue Jesus with all those parts, and as the fresh water comes in, the old and the gross drips out, which means it's going to affect our worship sometimes. Which means our hearts still need to be cleansed. And I thought that was a good picture for what cleansing looked like. But there's no shortcuts. Faster does not always mean better. I love this. What's the longest way to get somewhere? A shortcut. It may seem like a strange detail, but people were using the temple court as a shortcut to get from one part of the city to the other. And this is not what the temple was meant for. It was never supposed to be a pass-through. It was supposed to be a place of prayer and a place of presence. And it makes me think about, where in our lives have we done this? Where have we taken parts of our faith that have become convenient and rather than concentrated? Consecrated, set aside, made holy. Where have we, are we preparing? When we are preparing our hearts to engage, when we come to be equipped each week? Are we preparing to enter our workplaces as Jesus would? Or have we lost some of the focus and we've gotten convenient with the little ways that we get to where we need to go? Because we're focused more on our calendar more than sometimes our holiness. Where have we taken spiritual shortcuts? We'll have a chance to discuss a few of these questions, but I want to get you thinking about it now. Where have we taken spiritual shortcuts? The purpose of the temple. Remember what God said to David when David said he wanted to build him a house? He said no. He 100% said no. But David was like, hey, I'm building this great house for me. You know what? I should build a great house for God. And God's like, I don't need a house. I'm fine. Plus, you have too much blood on your hands. You can't build it. It'd be tainted. So Solomon built an incredibly elaborate temple, something visual that he probably would have seen every day, all the time. And what happens to Solomon? Sacrificing your babies over there? Climbing those Asherah poles? His wives are leading him astray. He's missing, even though he's got this very physical, beautiful temple that's supposed to show the glory of God. He misses the focus. And the purpose of the temple was to be a house of prayer for all nations, which is our third point. I like this. This was kind of like stained glass of taking the flags of the different countries and bringing it into a house of prayer. I thought that was a beautiful picture. Makes me think of, just how we're going to celebrate in the new heavens and the new earths, every tongue and tribe worshiping. And it's going to be people that look different and act different and think different, which is one of the reasons why we have Mosaic Family. It's probably why I like this picture so much. Broken glass to make a new whole thing. But I think this is what the point of the temple was supposed to be, and it's not functioning like it's supposed to. In verse 17, he says he was teaching them and saying to them, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you've made it a den of robbers. Jesus isn't just angry. He's grieving. The temple was meant to draw all nations to God, but instead it had become a barrier. The Jews had failed to protect the space meant for Gentiles, and they turned it into a market. Just like an ATM in the foyer. or an ice cream truck or food. I don't know. Maybe we should have a food truck night, but maybe we pay them before so there's no exchanging of funds. I don't know how that works. But I think it's like putting an ATM in the foyer of the church and calling it outreach. Question I want you to think about is, how do we intentionally or unintentionally exclude people from worship? I think there's a lot of different answers for this. This is where it gets really difficult to try to figure out how do we engage all the people in there. When we went to graduation, there was an ASL interpreter, there was captions. What I didn't see was translation, besides ASL translation. You would have seen that at some of the other graduations. I'm encouraged to hear that, but I mean, I guarantee there were people that were sitting there not knowing anything that was happening, because it's crazy the number of languages in the school district. It's like well over 40. I've heard bigger numbers, but I don't have any statistics now. But think about that. If you're going to invite your friend that is not, maybe not a natural English speaker or a first language English speaker, and they would come to our service, everything we do is in English. How would we include somebody whose native tongue isn't English? I don't have the answers for us. But I do think there's some steps that we can start taking the way to help include those people. And we have to figure some of this out before some of those people come. And in verse 18, it says the chief priests and the scribes heard it. Just like the fig tree where Jesus said the curse word to the fig tree and the disciples heard it. Mark is putting this in here on purpose. They're aware that their power systems and their little kingdoms are getting disrupted, that Jesus is not going to play ball the way that they play ball. And they were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because the crowd was astonished at his teaching, because there's a shift of power. Because they are not the ones running the show now. And Jesus is bringing the truth, teaching with authority, telling them how it should be. And all of the chief priests and the scribes are freaking out. This can't be. I won't make any money if I don't sell any stuff down at the Gentile court. I think it's this moment that reveals a deeper conflict, that the religious leaders were not just uncomfortable, they were threatened. Jesus was disrupting the system that they controlled. He was uncontrollable, unpredictable, and unafraid. And that can't be the Messiah. Oh, what a gross image of like a Messiah that would be in the image of the scribes and the chief priests. It would not be somebody that was a bull like a lion. It would be more like a puppet, I think, with the way that they would want them to come. Because as soon as they start getting their hearts pressed, they start to see that they're missing it, and they freak out, and they're like, oh, we're going to kill him. They didn't want a Messiah who cleansed temples. They wanted one who kept order and upheld their authority. In verse 19 it says, when the evening came, they went out of the city. Jesus leaves the temple, but he had made his point. So now the question remains, will we invite him in to overturn the tables of our lives? This isn't just for people that are just coming to Jesus. This is for every believer, for each one of us, every single day. To realize that we put too much focus and too much emphasis on so many other things, and we do not focus on connecting with Jesus like we should. Are we going to allow Jesus to disrupt our shortcuts and reclaim our sacred space? There's a lot more that's happening here than Jesus getting mad and flipping tables. There's exposure in the biggest sense of what the word could mean. Jesus is showing that the design of the temple to point people to God is not doing what it's supposed to do because they are taking advantage of the people that shouldn't be taking advantage. Everyone should be able to have access to God. There's no shortcuts. Because the temple's supposed to be a house of prayer to all nations. Last week we talked about the fig tree, about how the outsides and the insides need to match. We talked about like, hey, Jesus says, hey, this was giving me false promise. I cursed it, it died, and here's the reason why. It's just, it shows the faith of a parable lived out. But it's right after this that they come back and they see, oh, wow, this is another example of the insides not matching the outsides. If we're not careful, I think we can be in the same spot as the chief priests and the scribes. Real focused on doing church and living lives the way that we think that fits the boxes, but missing the heart of the Jesus that transforms our lives. Let's pray. One of the beautiful things, Lord, is about the temple was there was a place that we could go to worship. We could walk and we could have, some ceremony and preparation as we would atone for our sins. And I'm thankful that you don't dwell in buildings made by man, but you dwell in the hearts of those that believe in you. So, Lord, I pray that we would think of our bodies as your temple, that we think about our congregations and gatherings as your temple, that we would think about how we live as an example for all the nations. Lord, convict us of ways that we are excluding others. Help us to see how we can engage and include and invite others to participate in what you're doing. Lord, we know that you are not limited to just one type of people. You're not just limited to one family group of Israel, Lord, that you came and that you brought the gospel to all nations. So I pray that our worship would reflect that. Not just our singing, but how we live. Bless our conversation. In Jesus' name, amen.